Good morning and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. Glad to see Lucille and Ozzy already here chiming in. And if you're just joining us, go ahead and pipe in. Let me know you're here. That was some footage from Operation Nordic Response 24, where where they were using Norwegian CB-90 fast attack boats. Ukraine's going to get 13 of these, which should be an interesting add for their budding naval power, for lack of a better way to say it, and should be interesting, especially as we've seen these do landing operations in these pretty interesting waters up there. We've got quite a few interesting things going on in Ukraine this week, or this today, I should say, just last night. Let's go ahead and get started with the biggest piece of news right off the bat. That was a missile strike that appeared to hit within 150 meters or within 500 feet of both President Zelensky and Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. So that was a close call. Russia initially denied launching strikes at that time, but think about that for just a moment. If there was a prime minister from a NATO country that was killed, wouldn't that pretty much trigger an Article 5 intervention there? I mean, we've fought world wars for less. Think about the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand that kicked off a world war. This is how close we are to having things get really, really bad. Not that it's not already bad enough, let me tell you. Anyway, so there's a couple of accounts of this. The Greek delegation is safe, and both leaders did make a joint statement where they talked about this. There were dead and wounded. President Zelensky did release a statement, as well as the Prime Minister of Greece. And those statements should be, let me see, hold on a second. They'll be right there. So this was a close call, I'll tell you. The missile strike did kill 5 in the area. And was it targeted? The Russians say no, at least not targeted at the leadership there. The fact, of course, Odessa is a common target for Russian missiles, but overall, this just feels like it's an awfully big coincidence if so. As President Zelensky said, we saw this strike today. You see who we are dealing with. They don't care where they hit. With 5 people killed in the attack, and all the damage that was inflicted by it, even the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis had his own statement on it. When they heard the air raid sirens shortly before, they then went to their motorcade. As he said, shortly after, as we were getting into our cars, we heard a big explosion. I think this is one more reason why all European leaders should come to Ukraine in order to experience the war firsthand. There are people who actually are denying that the war is even happening. Some big names have even said, shucks, we're not even seeing near the news reports. Why don't we have reporters on the front lines reporting right from the trenches and things like that? And that's just not how it's going. There's so many citizen and individual journalistic actions taking place. People who are reporting from their own trenches without having to need a big named reporter to show up. It's not like they're going to send somebody like me over there to tour the trenches and talk to all the people. I'm not qualified for that, let me tell you. But overall, this war is getting to be really close here, and within 500 feet, and it could have been really an Article 5 situation for NATO. Gray Zone, which is the Wagner-affiliated, now presumably Russian Ministry of Defense affiliated account, initially blamed the whole thing on Ukraine, saying, we didn't launch anything at Ukraine, at Odessa at that point in time. Clearly, this is a setup that the Ukrainians do to make it act like the leaders of these countries are coming into a war zone. and obviously they're just faking it all. Then a little bit later, the Russian armed forces actually put in their report saying that they launched an attack that morning at that time on an industrial port area of Odessa. And they claim that they hit their targeted strike. So that is the situation on that close call over there with the Greek prime minister. There is one thing I did want to address real quick as we move on from this close call. There's been a lot of commentary that the Ukrainians are suppressing churches and things like that. Well, let me introduce you to one of those churches that are supposedly being oppressed. Whoops, let's get that back together here. I'm going to go ahead and drop this link right here. This is talking about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. This is a pro-Kremlin propagandist church. In fact, it is likely heavily influenced or even controlled directly by the FSB. That's been the situation with the Russian Orthodox Church as well, is basically if you've got a priest of the Russian Orthodox Church, they're also an FSB agent. There's no distance between the two. And much the same was happening with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. This thread here by Pekka Kallioniemi, that's a rough name, at least for me here, talks about all of the situation that with this church, what it was in the middle of, and goes into all of the situation around it. This is where Tucker Carlson yells about the priest being thrown into jail, and the law that basically says the Ukrainian authorities have power to investigate these so-called religious groups to the Russian Federation and investigate those connections. The whole situation is here so you can understand it, go through it, and be able to know what's going on. I'm not going to make a judgment call one way or the other on this. That's the reason why I'm providing the information for you. So the next time somebody comes along and is like, oh, they're banning churches. No, they're banning Russian intelligence agents. And that's the long and short of it. Just because somebody puts on the frock and the collar and wears a big tall hat does not make them a man of God. And we see that on a regular basis here. Just because you can do a fire and brimstone preach from the pulpit does not make you a man of God. So that's the situation here on this one. I wanted to share it with you again so you can make your own conclusions on it and understand that that is what they're facing over in Ukraine. It's much like many other military interventions that the U.S. has had to do. It's often hard to determine who the good guys and bad guys are, especially when the bad guys like to dress up like the good guys and hide out. Let's move on to the news out of Ukraine itself. The Institute for the Study of War says that continued delays in Western security assistance will likely postpone Ukrainian efforts to regain theater-wide initiative. This is after they talk about Ukrainian Ground Forces Commander Lieutenant General Oleksandr Pavyuk stating that they were going to try to seize the initiative this year and conduct some unspecified counteroffensive actions in 2024. Their overall goals, of course, is for them to stabilize the frontline situation, regroup, conduct counteroffensive actions, also take some time to reform some of the units that are being they've gone through a lot of losses and things like that, and get them retrained and rested and prepared for future operations there. So this is a tough situation for Ukraine. They're stating that they hope to be able to accomplish some of their offensive actions this year, as well as reconstitute and defend the areas that they have. Ozzy says the Russian Orthodox Church is making a massive mistake being a tool and tied to a regime. When the regime falls, yes, and that's just it, is that once you've tied your church to the political regime, you never can truly claim independence again. And that is where the issue lies for the Russian Orthodox Church and any church that decides they're going to go all in on purely political grounds or become an organ of the state. Ukraine states that they are open to limits on the European Union trade to diffuse tensions between Poland and Ukraine. Overall, though, they're also calling for a Europe-wide ban on Russian grain. And to be honest, that is an absolute win for Ukraine if they can pull it off. If they accept some trade restrictions and yet Russia loses the ability to sell into the European market at all for their grain and agricultural products, that would be a big blow to Russia, and yet Ukraine can still sell their stuff to Africa. They can still sell their stuff to America. They can still sell their stuff to South America. They can still sell their stuff to Asia. They've got all these options here that they can still do, and they can still trade with the European Union at the same time with some restrictions. This should, assuming those farmers are not just purely Russian partisans, this should be the deal that they really want to have. Here was a weird one here. Ukrainian commandos have been fighting Russian influence in Sudan. They actually took part in hostilities in Sudan to fend off Wagner-backed militants. And this looks like even though these claims kind of came out a little while ago, they never were really confirmed. Even so, the Wall Street Journal is just making this claim without actually getting confirmation from Ukrainian military contacts. Even so, the proof seems to be there. The proof is in the pudding, as they like to say, and it looks like there's a lot of pudding in Sudan right now. This is interesting in the fact that Zelensky and Budanov in particular have both said they will wage war against Russia wherever Russia is. So they're trying to counter Russian influence, because the more they counter Russian influence, the weaker Russia becomes. A deal on transiting Russian gas through Ukraine is unlikely to be renewed. This contract expires in December of this year, and I'm surprised they're even allowing any of that gas to flow at this point in time. However, there are still contracts, and therefore they're fulfilling the contract to the very end. Now let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Russia. A Russian election organizer was killed in an explosion in occupied Berdyansk. Apparently, this woman was driving around helping organize Russian elections in Berdyansk, and the car that she was driving suddenly exploded. This, of course, outright killed this election person right here and resulted in this situation as it is. It's clear, at least to me, that there is a strong partisan movement in the occupied territories. People don't really want to be under Russia. Russia claimed that Ukrainian drones attacked Kursk and Voronezh oblasts early on March 6th, allegedly causing a warehouse fire in the first of the two regions. And I've seen several videos of that. I think I've got some of them in here, and we'll see if we can pot up. There we go. This is from the Varachav mining and processing plant in Kursk. Let's go ahead and see if it'll play right now. Close that. Hit the play there. That facility, this is, I believe, an oil storage tank, went up in flames, and it looks like they had to work pretty hard to put out the fire. More on that. Obviously, I found a lot of videos on that. Here's one with a little bit closer view of it. This just more fuel tanks burning and more destruction of Russia's oil infrastructure. Russian servicemen received humanitarian aid from Moscow, but there was no food. There were just hundreds upon hundreds of bottles of expired sanitizing hand gel, no matter what the box was labeled, large, small, whatever they might say is in it. Instead, they received lots and lots of hand sanitizer. What are they going to do with that on the front lines? I mean, maybe it might be flammable if you got creative, if it's got alcohol in it, but that's about it. They're on the front lines. They need basic supplies, not hand sanitizer. By the way, about that plant that was attacked earlier, this is also one of the largest plants producing iron ore and materials in Russia. That means that it's directly linked to Russia's military complex as well. This one caught my eye, and I have to admit that I don't have good confirmation from multiple sources on this one. But it's interesting, and it does have the video attached talking about Chinese mercenaries in the ranks of the Russian armed forces. The quote says, the Chinese unit in the Pyatanashka Brigade is growing. More and more Chinese are constantly arriving. Our Chinese brothers have also come to us. They basically are saying that they've got a China-based unit put together in the Russian military. And if so, it's going to depend on exactly how those people were recruited. Were they officially endorsed by China? And if so, that means they're a direct participant in the war. That would mean that China should come under all the sanctions that Russia is under as well. Let's move over to the Ruski Mir. We've talked many times about how the Russians seem to be wanting to expand every direction they can, grab all the real estate they can. Of course, they always precede that with the claim that no, we would never attack there. Not a chance. No way would we ever attack there. But Belgium, happens to a large extent have appeared on the world map as an independent state thanks to Russia. I mean, really, they should be very thankful for Russia helping Belgium to exist. That's a great start for another invasion of another European country. And in the classic sign of a nice, healthy democracy, according to Peskov, we will no longer tolerate the criticism of our democracy. Our democracy is the best. Yeah, and if you don't allow people to talk and actually have that conversation, that's no longer a democracy. We're kind of moving things along here. We've got still plenty more to go through here. We've got the international stuff as well. If you have any questions or comments, absolutely chime in. I'd be delighted to read them. I am watching for them. So let's go ahead and get into this here. Let's translate this here. France and Moldova will sign a defense cooperation agreement this Thursday that would emphasize support for the independence, sovereignty, and security of the Republic of Moldova. In the context, I might add, of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Moldova's looking for partners and allies at this point in time. The Russians have already started their information operations over there in Moldova, trying to cause a lot of problems there and trying to overturn it. They already had the leader of one of the regions over there show up in Moscow talking to Vladimir Putin, and it's pretty clear that Russia's been trying to stir the pot there, create a situation where they can find an excuse to intervene. Though whether they have the materiel or supplies or troops to do so is still up in the air. But overall, that's the situation we're looking at in between Moldova and France. Moldova desperately needs allies at this point in time. Britain is claiming they're pushing towards a 2.5% of GDP spending on defense. Now, for those who are not in the know, NATO requires 2% of your GDP to be spent on the defense of your own country. That does not mean that they're ponying up a paycheck to NATO saying, here's 2% of my GDP. No, they're supposed to be spending that money on their own weapons, their own equipment, their own military members, their own recruiting and efforts to generate a good military defense for their own country. This is just an indication. The 2% is the minimum required. Obviously, many nations don't meet that, but you're starting to see a pattern. Poland is over 4% now. The UK is at 2.5%, or working towards 2.5%. This indicates that they're really seeing the real threat and they're moving forward. The Czech-led initiative to buy a whole bunch of 155 millimeter artillery shells and other shells as well on the world markets has nearly been funded. Several other sources stated that they were actually done collecting the money for this. So they're working on getting those shells purchased and moved over to Ukraine now, as my understanding is. Polish farmers have moved from just striking on the borders with Ukraine to striking in Warsaw itself. This is in protest against Ukrainian agricultural imports and EU environmental policies. All right, brief pause here. Let's take a look. Ozzy says, Russian democracy, no questions or else. And there's no way for Russia to supply Transnistria. To get there, Russia has to cross either Romania NATO territory or Ukrainian airspace. It's landlocked. Absolutely correct. That does not mean that Russia cannot cause all kinds of hate and discontent. They already pulled off the whole little green men in Crimea thing. So I believe there's plenty of ways that they can gradually sneak in what they need, then stir up the populace itself, and potentially with the right money, the palms greased, and the right agitation, that they would be able to create a situation there that would be a dilemma for Ukraine as well as Moldova. Tony says, always watch your streaming. Great content. Keep it up. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Tony. Glad to have you here. And Lucille says, setting up for more propaganda, absolutely. Even if Russia doesn't actually do a military intervention in Moldova and Transnistria, the propaganda coup itself is enough to cause a tremendous amount of damage in Europe. And if they can pull off even more of those regions and attach them to Transnistria, it will absolutely be a stunning defeat for Moldova and clear that Russia's got the upper hand. Moldova, of course, is saying, watch out for Russian interference in their elections. They've already got people that are pro-Russia that are running for offices there, trying to agitate the population and interfere with the elections, grease some palms, set up the whole situation there. It's a tough spot for Moldova to be in. And if Russia can pull this off, they will totally screw up the Moldovan EU accession. Now, this is an interesting one from the Washington Post. Olena Zelensky has declined to attend the State of the Union invitation extended by Jill Biden and Joe Biden. This caused a bit of a kerfuffle. You see, initially they were going to seat her next to Navalnaya. So kind of showing the women opposing Putin, pairing right there. Except for Navalnaya has been basically saying, Ukraine, don't care about Ukraine. Don't talk to me about Ukraine. Ukraine is nothing. And has said that Ukraine should give up. So those two together is a bad thing. And so a bunch of people made a bunch of hay about it being, it's about this conflict between the two. No, it turns out that it had nothing to do with it. Zelensky just didn't want to be a part of this. And my understanding is neither did Navalnaya. Here's that rejection right there. They says that there was they were both turned down in the end, and they say it was nothing to do with the other lady. London is saying they're ready to provide a loan to Ukraine in the amount of the frozen Russian assets. This is a great way to get Russia to start paying for their war directly. More about the general farmer strike. You can see that's starting to get a little flaming hot over there. An interesting little side note here. Armenia has basically told Russia, no thank you, get your border guards, your Russian border guards, out of Zvartnots airport. And now the Russians are saying, we didn't get any such letter. There's no such thing. We've never heard any such thing about it. But Armenia is saying, get out of there. We don't want you. This is an indication that some of these countries are starting to pick which side they are. And they're picking based on which one they think is going to protect them better. Russia is distracted. The question is, can they continue to agitate in those populations? Having Russian troops in your country is a recipe to have your country overthrown. This talks about the Syrian Express, weapons being brought from Syria and brought to Russia. The military transports that have been going back and forth are no longer passing through the Bosphorus Strait. This whole situation is getting interesting. Did Turkey discover the hidden weapons in one of these transports? Because they're not supposed to be allowing weapons to be passed through those straits. So those ships have now started changing their course and going around. You can see a route on the top picture there going up to St. Petersburg instead. And overall, we don't know why this is happening. There's a bunch of possible reasons. Could they be concerned that Ukraine might sink those ships? Could they be concerned? Could Turkey be concerned and stopping them themselves? We're not sure. All we know is those ships have been redirected. Czechia and Ukraine are working around the clock to modernize a facility on Ukraine's western border. The idea is to set up an arms and ammunition hub to aid Ukraine. A lot of that assistance has been coming through Poland, but Poland is up in arms. There's people blocking the borders there. So now with Czechia providing a location, they can put all of that equipment, transport it there, and then transport it across the border. With another possible route that will be maybe not as convenient or effective as Poland, but at least they'll have the alternative. Those Bulgarian armored personnel carriers have finally started to transport to Ukraine. There also looks like they've got some self-propelled guns and some BRDM-2s that are also being shipped. Nice little bonuses to go along with that. From Patrick Fox, a USAF vet, this is what it looks like when a nation is serious about its national defense. Polish active duty forces currently number just over 200,000, with an additional 350,000 reserves. Plans are to boost the active component to 300,000 by 2035. All while undergoing a massive equipment modernization effort to rid themselves of the last of their Soviet-manufactured hardware. This is an effort to get onto Western NATO equipment and get rid of the last vestiges of their Soviet-era dregs. It's better equipment for one thing, and beyond that, it also means that they're fully aligning with the Western powers. They know what it's like to be under Russian control. They don't want it again. Another weird little bit here. The Dorset Tank Museum is helping Ukraine by finding and providing spares for the older Ukrainian tanks. This is just an interesting little partnership going on here. And they're not... I don't think they're pulling actual equipment out of the museum, no display pieces, but the Tank Museum has a lot of equipment that is duplicates and extras that could easily be stripped of parts and those parts shipped over to Ukraine. Interesting, to say the least. And this is talking about Poland spending 4% of their GDP on the military. This is, as Marek Magierowski says, this is not surprising because of the incredibly bellicose nature of one of our neighbors. That's the international front right there. Let's go ahead and move into the front lines. Ozzy says, a naval analyst who appears on Andrew Perpetua's stream thought it was due to the naval drone threat in the Black Sea. I happen to believe that, but I don't have proof of that. And that's the reason why I kind of hedge my bets there. A few other sources have indicated it might be Turkey that's stopping them. And so I see both ways on that one. I don't think any of us know for sure. And since none of us are in Russia's high command, I don't think any of us will ever know for sure. But still, let's go on to the front lines here. We're early in the morning for a big update, so we've only got a couple of little things. Over here near Marinka, let's go ahead and pull out so you can kind of get some context here. Marinka is in the southeast part of the lines near Donetsk area here. So we go to Marinka, and we can look at yesterday's lines where we see this little nubby sticking out over here on this top right here. It's on a tree line, so it's not like a major change here, but the Ukrainians have reported kicking the Russians out of that tree line. But over in Orlivka, the Russians have managed to capture a little bit more territory, mostly open territory to the southwest of Orlivka itself. Orlivka is outside of Avdiivka, just to give you some context. Over in the occupied Luhansk region, HIMARS attack took out an ammunition depot. This is reported by the Russian side, so we're pretty much confirmed. And the Russian Ministry of Defense has announced the destruction of the third American Abrams tank. Again, no surprise. I've seen video on the first, and I saw the video from this third one. I don't think I ever saw the second one for sure. So, possibly true. Possibly true. Over near Avdiivka, the Knoll report says there were no major changes. That just kind of catches us up to what the deep state map shows before. There's a lot of, the Ukrainians have managed to dig in on the western borders near Berdichi, Orlivka, and Toninke. And this is a temporary, strong defense line that Russia will have to fight their way through again. Novomikhailivka, this is the only place I'm seeing it reported, but Knoll reports is usually really good. Some additional territory taken to the south of Novomikhailivka. Let's see if I can get that kind of pulled up over here. Problem is there's like a dozen Novomikhailivka here, and I can't remember which one this one is. Yeah, this one right here. This is what they were showing over here. Knoll reports shows less of the town being taken, on at least on the middle here, but shows more of the east side. And now they're showing this little extra bit right here. Generally, I think the Knoll reports is more accurate in this case. And that's the front lines. I mean, we're burning through the information today. I'm going to go on to the extras. This, of course, is how you get an ally. When you can get a cat sleeping in your arms while you're sleeping in the trench. And again, I'm always amazed by how much the Ukrainian troops take care of the little animals. Tony says, when will Congress go back to work? Do you know the latest about the Ukrainian aid? The latest is that Speaker Johnson has claimed that he's going to take up that bill in early April-ish timeframe. That's another several weeks out. That said, I know that there's a Democrat who's working on a petition. Don't remember what the name of it is right now, but it's basically to force the issue to the floor and force it out of committee, and a discharge petition. There we go. They're working on a discharge petition to bring that aid right to the floor and cause a vote on it. So that's the current status. Not good news at all, but certainly not the worst news ever. Houthis struck another cargo ship off the coast of Yemen, killing 2 crew members. This situation over here, The truth is, the world overall needs to go in there and introduce the Houthis to the idea that they're not allowed to touch our boats. And by doing so, totally eliminate them as a threat. Otherwise, they'll just keep coming back. This one is just interesting. The Falcon 9 delivered 3 Americans and 1 Russian astronaut to the International Space Station. This is the last Russian who will be sent into space under an agreement between NASA and Roscosmos. Another super cute cat. What can I say? I can't stand not having cute cats. This was yesterday. A U.S. Air Force B-1B Lancer, a B-52 Stratofortress, and 2 Swedish Gripens conducted a flyover of Stockholm as they enter the final stages of joining the NATO alliance. This is the type of interoperability that we should have going constantly with our allies. And that's what it is. That's a very impressive sight to see over your capital city. I'm going to pause this here for a moment. I'm going to give you a warning in advance. If you're an animal lover, this one's kind of hard to watch. But I think it's important. This dog suffered a stroke after a Russian attack on the Dnipro River. Hind legs failed, and now the dog is fighting for his life. The doctors do continue. These explosions are so damaging to these animals. And this one is, and even though the dog's older, they suffer these symptoms because they are so traumatized. And the first time I saw this, it was a tough one for me, seeing that the dog suffering a stroke like that. I got to stop that because I can't watch it anymore. But that is the damages. And ironically, it's easier to look at this than it is to look at the children that are being blown up. But this war needs to end, and Russia needs to get their butts out of there. Speaking of Russians and animals, how's this? A polar bear stuck his head inside a window, and apparently they've gotten used to feeding him treats. Apparently the Russians really don't care about self-preservation, but, there you go. They're feeding the polar bears now. And really the only reason this is here is because it's cute, and I would never be able to pull that off. And that's everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Glad to have you here. I hope I've answered all your questions as best I can. And if you found that this information is vital, absolutely hit me with that thumbs up. You have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next video.